Hey folks, it's Rob here with another Sunday session, and tonight is open mic night, which means that you guys get to submit the questions in advance, and I will do what I can to try and answer them where humanly possible. Now, in order to do that, we get the questions submitted in advance. That gives me a little bit of time to do a little bit of homework as and where required. So if you would like to submit your questions for next month, we run these on the first Saturday of every single month. If you'd like to submit those for next month, click on the link below and you can submit your questions. Now, that said, we have got a bucket load of questions for you guys today, and I can't wait to try and help you do that. Now, first one comes from Simran. So this is we've got a couple of really lengthy ones here. So folks, if you can bear with me while I read these out. So Simran asks, hi Rob, I'm a first-time developer and finding it hard to get the feasibility assessment right. If the input is rubbery, the output will be the same. What are the ways to get the feasibility as close to accurate? Is this something I should outsource for a fee? So Simran, really good question, mate. And I guess the first thing that I would like to say is a lot of people look at feasibilities the wrong way, and they think that there's some magic spreadsheet or some magic piece of software that's going to give them all of the answers. And many, many times I get somebody say, hey, the feasibility is looking great, but I haven't done the due diligence on the site yet. And I go, well, hang on, because a feasibility, when you come down to it, really just comes down to two things, mate, just two. So one is the ability to do the site analysis well and to identify every single issue and challenge that you are going to solve on the project. If you do not identify the issue, it won't have a cost center associated with it. So it won't make it into your feasibility. And so the feasibility is going to look fantastic. But when you go and run the software, when you run the project, I should say, that problem will eventually eventuate. So you need to be really good at your site analysis. The second thing you really need to be good at is the sales figures. And one of the things that I guess I see happen many, many times is we get a little bit overly optimistic on what we think the sales are going to be, and the ability to read the market and know how and where the market is. You need to understand where the market is right now, and also what are all the drivers that go into where is the market heading, and that's going to be very local and specific to you, because you're going to find one area where the market's going up, another area where the market's going down. And if you don't know how to read that, you're going to have a whole bunch of problems. So now, to help there, I've got a couple of previous Sunday sessions where I talked to you about the differences between market indicators and market drivers. So an indicator is something that has already happened, and a market driver is where the market is actually going. Now, feasibility is really the adding and subtracting of those two things. So if you get really good at those two elements, then you should be able to do your own feasibility yourself. Now, your question then was, well, is that something that I should outsource for a fee? And the answer is that you can, absolutely. But the problem is, and this is a challenge that I see by many, many people in our community, is they think that they are delegating the work to someone else. But in reality, what they're doing is they're abdicating the work. And what I mean by that is, if you have no ability to determine whether or not that person is actually doing a good job or not, then you have no idea whether they are actually going to be accurate. So I'm all for delegation, but I'm not for abdication. So if you're just going to pay someone else to do it because you don't know how to do it, then that's really not in your best interests. Instead, what I would highly recommend is that you get some form of education, you get someone sitting over your shoulder and actually looking at the site and actually analyzing the site with you, identifying those issues and challenges, and then go and actually cost all of those for you. What that could be, I guess, somebody that you partner with, that could be someone in the community, that could be some formal education, whatever that is, mate. You want to educate yourself and be able to determine whether that person that you have actually delegated that to, that you can actually assess that they've actually done a very good job. So that's probably I guess the number one key thing that you want out of that. The second question that Simran has asked is, if you were to pick a few suburbs in Melbourne for a medium spec 2 or 3 bedroom townhouse, what suburbs would you pick based on your time experience? The overall budget being 2.5 million. Now, this one, mate, I'm going to answer a little bit cryptically and give you a little bit of homework. Because if I go and magically say one particular suburb, then all of you are going to race to that suburb, and the day after, that suburb is then going to blow up. And I've seen it many, many times where educators have actually gone out taking people on bus trips, and a market that somebody's been working for quite some time and been nurturing that market and getting lots of good results, and all of a sudden 300 or 400 people suddenly turn up and they all have no idea what they're doing, and they pay overs, and all of a sudden they blow the whole suburb up. So I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to teach you how to fish rather than to give you fish. So one of the things that you need to understand, mate, is that it doesn't matter how well you run your project. It doesn't matter how well you identify all the issues and challenges. It doesn't matter how perfectly you run the project on budget. What matters the most is there going to be someone at the end who wants to buy your product? Because if nobody buys it, nobody will pay for it. So the thing that you want to work out is, where is the population going? If you know where the population is going, then that's going to start to indicate where the demand is. And then if you put the product in front of them before they get there, then that is your answer. Now, there are lots and lots of state government, local government strategic plans that will actually give you insights into that. That is something that we go into in a lot of detail in our property development formula program. I'm not going to go into that here, other than to say it takes a bit of work to actually work that out. But once you have, it's a gold mine, and it's the gift that keeps on giving for many, many years. And you'll be able to pick the market, because you'll be able to read the market and you'll be able to pick where it's going to move next. And so you don't want to be the first one in, and you certainly don't want to be the last one out. And so your ability to read that market is really, really critical. So site analysis, reading the market, they're the two things that you need, Simran. And if you can't do that yourself, then find someone that you can shadow or that can teach you the process, rather than just paying a fee. Yes, you can pay a fee, but you have no idea whether or not that's the outcome, whether or not you can actually rely on that outcome. Anyway, hope that helps. Next question is from Steve. Now, Steve has got a very big question, so please forgive me while I try to read this out. I have a question for today's open mic event, but I'm up in Darwin on a mission and not sure if it'll be online at the time. So hope that you are online, Steve, and if you aren't online, then you would absolutely catch up with the recording. I'm looking at a JV on a duplex, and I've found a partner who has some cash in their back pocket, but business has been terrible for the last 8 months, so applying for a loan will not look good. We talked about our businesses coming together into the deal as an equity partner, using our business's books to secure the loan, and his cash to pay 20% deposit, then looking for a broker who has indicated that this type of development. We're looking to see if we should be able to do 100% construction funding. So the question is, so that was the background. The question is it common or even feasible to have an equity partner who simply puts up their profit and loss name to secure a loan? And then the secondary question, is there a good lawyer who has experience in this field? So I'll answer the first question. So is it common? Absolutely, it is common. So there are 3 lots of cash that need to go into a deal, and this is something that you want to factor into every single deal that you're doing if you're going into JV. So the first one is, I guess, the deposit or equity that is actually going in to secure the property in the first place. The second one is the debt or the serviceability that you need in order to secure the balance of payment. So if you're doing a 80% loan to value ratio, that'll be 20% deposit and 80% serviceability. Then the third element is then the liquid cash in order to run the deal. So they're your 3 elements. There are also 3 stages that you need those 3 elements. So the first stage is acquisition. The second stage is construction. Now, when you do acquisition, very often you can actually do a residential loan. So that would be a 20% type deposit. But when you get to the construction phase, getting a residential funder to actually fund that can be tricky when you're doing joint ventures and that sort of thing, because what the residential lender wants to see is for you to have a 20 or 30-year loan with them. And if they get wind of the fact that you're going to quickly construct it and then flip it, then they're going to refer you over to the commercial department. Now, So for their commercial department are more than happy to lend the money, but they do it on commercial terms, not on residential terms. So they're going to change the equity function. So it's more likely to be a 30% equity of the total development cost, or potentially 40% of GRV, gross realized value. They're typically the two numbers that you'll tend to work with. And then they look at the structure of the deal. So serviceability becomes a lot less of an issue. And so, yes, it actually can be. If you go into that residential space, then yes, you could have that equity partner come in, but you're going to struggle in trying to convince a bank that you're holding it for that long. So, you might be telling some half truths to the bank, which is not really in your best interest if they catch you out. Or you could bite the bullet and say, hey, we're going to do commercial construction loan anyway at some point in the process. Why don't we just be upfront right at the start, set the wheels in motion with regards to that, and I guess go down that particular path. And so then it's very, very common in order to do that. So then how you actually then start to break that up then starts to be, well, which partner is actually contributing which part of those processes? There's typically one partner who is the sweat equity partner, the person doing all the effort, and then one or many people that are contributing into the finances. And so what you want to do is then start to break up based on the amount of contribution that each investor is putting into the process, what your profit split might actually be in the back end. Now, it might be a profit split. It might be a function of just paying them an interest rate. That's something that you can actually negotiate as part of the process. However, yes, that can be done. Most people who specialize in property law can put together for you a joint venture document that can actually cover that up. So rather than reference any one particular lawyer, I guess there are lawyers all the way around the country that do that, I guess, for a living. And it's not really overly complicated. So I don't think that you're going to have that much of a challenge with that. Hope that helps, Steve, and hope that you are able to watch this, if not live, at least on the replay. Tian has then got a question. Tian says, with regards to bushfire overlays, what does the vegetation buffer mean, and what ways can I expect it to impact my site? Where can I go for help or information? So, Tian, I think the best answer to this is actually a meetup that we had in Brisbane literally last month. So if you are an annual member, my guidance to you would be to log in and look at the last Brisbane event. And that was all about bushfire overlays. And rather than just speak to vegetation buffers, it actually talks to, I guess, the whole gamut. So what is the attack level and what is the BAL rating and all of those elements there. So rather than me kind of doing a half-hearted job at doing that, there's a good 45 minutes of information that's going to come to you there from I think it was Walter's consulting group who actually gave us those insights there. So that's a fantastic place to go. But the vegetation buffer, in short, is really, I guess, the buffer between, I guess, where the bushfire actually is anticipated itself, and the buffer that you need, I guess, to make sure that the flames can't actually jump in order to get to your house. That's the short answer, but there's a lot more to it than that. So please, please, please go and actually have a look at that last session. And as I said, if you want to be an annual member, then you can actually go and do that. So just go to our website, developernetwork.com.au, go to the shop and click on annual membership, and you'll get access to all the back catalogue of all of the events, and you'll find that one and a whole bunch more. Irene's got a question. Hi, thinking of buying this rural residential land in Serena Mackay, 2.4 hectares to subdivide and develop and sell. I've contacted the town planner to request for a report on the restrictions on the land. What other due diligence do I need? Planning to subdivide, but keep some for my kids for possible retirement. Thank you. So Irene, really good question. And this is very similar to my response to Simran right at the very start. I guess there's a couple of challenges that go in here. So that firstly, your town planner is going to be of great assistance. They're going to tell you if it's possible, okay? And so they'll look at all of the rules that sit there. They'll look at the zoning, they'll look at the overlays, they'll look at other constraints, and they'll tell you whether or not council will actually give you approval, and they'll give you really good advice on doing that. Where they don't help, though, is that they are not telling you whether it should be done. So they're telling you, can it be done? They're not telling you, should it be done? And what you need to be able to do is a full feasibility to actually identify all the issues and challenges, similar to what I was touching on with Simran, to say whether or not the profitability is actually in the deal in the first place. Now, you touched on the fact that you want to subdivide and keep a number of these. So your drivers, in order to generate that profit, might be a little bit different to someone who is, I guess, trying to subdivide and flip it straight away because they need to realize money straight away because you're looking at holding this for a long term. However, my candor to you would be, look, you really want the deal to actually stack up on its own merits, because at some point you're likely to need funding in order to get there. And if you don't have profitability in the deal, nobody will actually fund it. So I guess, can it be done is the town planner. Should it be done? That's you doing your feasibility. And as I said, that's identifying all the issues and challenges that need to be solved. Go talk to the relevant consultants in order to price all of those issues up. Do your market research on what that is actually going to do, and then I guess subtract one from the other. Now, for both Irene and Simran, I have a spreadsheet called Quick Feeso, which does some Feeso calculations that you can actually go and buy relatively cheaply at our shop. However, we're doing some massive updates on that. So there's going to, and you get free updates for life, but anticipate some massive updates on that in the next little while. So if you already own Quick Feeso, watch out for the new release in about 2 months' time. We've got some massive, massive changes coming into that to make it even better and badder than it is right now. Now, I have another Irene, two Irenes. So the first one was Irene G, the next one is Irene M. And again, another long question. So humble apologies here, folks, for the length of this question. Hi, Rob. I recently purchased a house in New South Wales that I wanted to build a granny flat on. And upon inspection, the builder mentioned I might be able to apply for dual occupancy. He put me in touch with the town planner to confirm this is true. My question is, how do you decide which option is the best if our focus is capital growth? We did not purchase the property thinking it would be developed, so it would have development potential, not in a position to take on the project at this point in time. A friend suggests that I apply for dual occupancy DA so that I would have the option of building later down the track or sell with DA plans. This is our current home, which we plan to upsize to another area in 2 to 3 years' time. Thanks for hosting this forum and your valued advice. Well, firstly, thank you, Irene, for thanking me. So thank you for thanking me. That's always fantastic. Okay, so I've got to be careful here that I can't give you advice. I'm just giving, I guess, my thoughts and processes here. So I guess I'm going to go back a step before actually answering the question. There's only really 4 reasons why you buy a property, okay? Capital growth, cash flow, manufactured profit being property development, and lifestyle. Now, what you have said in your response is you actually bought it for lifestyle purposes. Now, for lifestyle purposes means that you're not really trying to make any profit out of the deal. It's just somewhere that you actually wanted to live. Now, what you're trying to do is retrospectively inject a manufactured profit type return out of that, of which you're trying to determine, do you do a manufactured profit, which is going to be cash flow or capital gain, with a preference towards capital gain. So the challenge here is the reason why you bought the property in the first place may not necessarily mean the profit is in the deal, okay? So you need to be super, super careful here. And just because you can do it doesn't mean that you should do it. And you want to put a whole bunch of effort into doing the numbers. So what would that actually sell for? The other thing that you also said is that you're not looking to sell it for 2 to 3 years' time. Now, one of the things is that a development approval will actually expire, different dates and different timelines in different jurisdictions. So in some places, the DA only lasts for 2 years. In other places, the DA lasts for 4 years. And so what I would be doing is trying to time, if you're wanting to flick it on with a DA approval, I'd be trying to time that for closer to the mark when you're actually going to sell. That way the development approval isn't going to expire and you're going to waste all that time and effort in actually doing that. So yes, you can potentially put an extension on there, but you don't necessarily want to do that unnecessarily, a little bit too early. But what you want to do is you want to have a look at evidence of other granny flats, evidence of other dual occupancies, see what they're actually selling for, and then go back in time and compare what they sold for quite some time ago, because you're trying to look at the capital growth. I would also be looking at, I guess, from an area perspective, what has been the capital growth and what has been the yield for the area. Now, there's a couple of websites that are really handy for this. I use one called DSR Data, Demand and Supply Ratio.com.au. So dsrdata.com.au, but it stands for Demand and Supply Ratio. And it gives you some fantastic insights into what has been the supply and demand over a long period of time. That'll give you some insights into the capital growth. It will tell you what the yield is in the area. It'll tell you what the vacancy rates are and a whole bunch more. So you can actually have a look at, I guess the returns that you're actually going to get in the area. The other thing that you want to have a look at is have a look at the demographic of the area and go, well, maybe the demographic suits a particular kind of product. Should I do a duplex? Should I do a granny flat? Well, what's the demographic telling me? If you're got an area where people have a lot of young children, they're probably wanting a yard, and something relatively low maintenance, so duplex might be a little bit more attractive. If, however, the demographic of the area says, very few children, it might be, I guess, young upwardly mobiles that really just want somewhere to go and turn up, do their sleeping and partying and go out. They want very, very low maintenance. Then a granny flat might be a better option for you. So you want to understand your demographic, make sure you're putting the right product in place in the right location, because if you're putting the wrong thing there, then you might get an approval, but can it be done? Yes, but should it be done? Well, if it doesn't really suit the market, then you're not going to get the returns that you're actually anticipating. So hoping that helps, Irene. And again, thank you very much for your thanks in that response. Now, I'm whipping through these questions, folks, and probably going a little bit faster than I was anticipating. If you have a question right now, if I've got time, I would love, and if it actually comes through to me on time, I would love to see if you want to submit using the link below. I think I might be able to potentially do one or two, just off the cuff. So let's see if you can do it. Click on the link, propdev.info/open-mic. And if that comes through, I will do what I can to actually answer that. Next question is from Ursula. Ursula says, what's the best way to find out if there's a demand for micro apartments in the suburb of Norlane in Victoria? I.e. young professionals, single middle-aged, often divorced students, no uni nearby. The census data is still from 2016, and so having a little bit of problems getting that, I guess, what's happening in the area. I have a land suitable for development of cash flow project. What's your view on market apartments? So there's about 3 questions in there, Ursula. So I'm going to try and break it down firstly. So I don't know anything about Norlane in particular. So I'm just going to speak very generically here. But I guess micro apartments as a concept has a lot of merits in very specific circumstances. And you want to make sure that the demographic really suits. Now, as you touched on, you've attempted to look at the demographics, and the census data is a little bit dated. It's 2016 since it was last released. They've done a new census, and the new results are going to be out probably in the next 2 to 3 months. They're just collating those results right now. So if you can wait, I would wait for the new results. It's probably not going to make massive impact on what it is that you're doing this very second. However, that said, the 2016 results aren't that old. Yes, they're 6 years old. Normally census is done every 4 years, but COVID kind of got in the way of that. But 2016, the likelihood of, I guess, the entire market changing in that timeline would be very, very unlikely. Instead, what you're going to see is more likely micro movements. So I would still look at that 2016 data and use that as your baseline and go, is this really something that we're actually looking for? Now, a micro apartment is essentially the ability to carve up what looks like and feels like a normal house into multiple individual leases inside the property. Now, depending upon the jurisdiction, there are different legislations that you're going to need to comply with as to whether or not you need to have a master lease and a sublease, or whether or not you can actually have individual leases. And that's going to change from council to council, from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So I'm not going to talk on that. There are other educators who specialize in that, and that's probably their forte. What I would say, though, is what you need is the demographic to actually suit. The first thing you want to make sure is it has to be convenient. So you want to have proximity to transport, you want to have proximity to shops, and if you've got a proximity to a couple of other key elements, so proximity to a university might mean that you might have a demographic that is more university students. Proximity to a hospital might mean that you've got more nursing and doctor staff who might do shift type work. And if you've got proximity to an industrial area, then you're probably going to have blue collar workers. If you've got proximity to the airport, you've probably got access to FIFO, fly in, fly out type workers. So wherever you're physically located, there needs to be something that will determine the demographic of what people are actually going to be using that. If you're on the main transport route into the city, then you might get, I guess, young professionals or younger professionals, transporting it. So I guess transporting in and out to work. So I guess make sure that you're very, very acutely aware of the location that you're actually choosing and the services that are actually sitting around it, because you don't want to put this in the middle of nowhere, have no proximity to anything. And I guess on paper, it looks fantastic, but then nobody turns up. So back to your question. Your question was, what's the best way to find out if there's demand? Well, the best way to find out if there's demand is actually go on the websites that actually put those sorts of ads up. So there's a number of them out there, but the one that comes to mind is flatmates.com.au. So go on Flatmates and actually have a look. How many people are seeking an apartment? You might even put an ad up yourself, pay a small amount of expense, pay for the ad, see how many inquiries you actually get. And yes, you don't yet have the property, but you can still field the calls, understand the level of demand. That'll give you a good feel for whether or not it's actually going to work. And then when somebody calls you, you might go, sorry, the room's actually gone. So that, that you are wasting a couple of people's time in actually doing that, but it'll give you a really good feel for how that actually works. But each one of those demographics is going to have a slightly different set of requirements. Okay, so if you're, uni students, then they're going to want to have study desks, and they're going to have room to set up their computers, and want high-speed internets and all sorts of things like that. If they're blue-collar workers, they probably want bigger TVs in the rooms and still good internet, but they're going to be live streaming, all sorts of things like that. You want to make sure that you set up things like your power, so that because if they're leasing, on a per room basis, generally what you'll find is all the electricity is included and all the internet's included, and so they'll treat it like a hotel, and they just leave everything on all the time. So you want things to automatically turn off. You want motion sensors to turn off if they're not in the room. So turn off the lights, turn off the aircon, all those sorts of things. So there's a lot of things that you can do to actually manage the costs of those. Now, I've had micro apartments for a very, very, very long time, and I'm slowly disengaging from that market. I'm just finding that over time, the profitability in that is starting to erode with things like insurances and the compliance requirements that need to come with fire compliance and things like that. The costs are just starting to escalate, and the rental returns just aren't giving the yield that it used to. And the hassle factor for me is probably not something that I like. That said, there's still good money to be had in there if you can actually put up with that hassle factor and the legislation. Make sure that you are compliant with your disability access. Make sure you are compliant with your fire management. Make sure you're compliant with your insurances. They are the three areas that people... and the fourth area is make sure that the property is actually a Class 1B dwelling. Now, that is a National Construction Code standard. If you get any one of those four things wrong, then insurance companies will take your money. Banks will potentially foreclose on you. If things actually happen to the property, then they'll actually try to close it down. if something happens from an insurance perspective, that the insurance company may not honor it. So you want to make sure that you've actually got all of those compliance elements in place. Now, those compliance elements can be quite costly. Okay, so anyway, hope that helps, Ursula, and that gives you some insights into what to do. Colleen has got a question. Hi, Rob. My partner and I have just joined the group. Welcome. Thank you. We're selling a property in Sydney and we'll be able to start our flipping journey in a few months. We will be cashed up. I think Colleen has just announced that she might potentially be a money partner. Should we use our own money to buy the property outright? So is the question. So Colleen, firstly, what you said is a flipping strategy. Now, flipping generally tends to be some terminology that people use when they're doing a reno flip, okay? Now, I'm not sure if that's what you're actually talking about here, but whether you're, I guess, flipping or reno flipping, or whether or not you're doing a subdivision, whether you're doing townhouses or duplexes or anything like that, what we're looking at is getting in, adding some value to the property and getting out in a relatively short period of time. In doing that, there's a couple of challenges. So firstly, and I touched on it earlier on in the process, that money, the three elements, so the equity, the serviceability and the liquid cash, if you've got that, that's fantastic. You can go into deal number one, no problem at all. Problem is, what happens when deal number two comes along? At this point in time, all your money is tied up and you no longer have the ability to get into deal number two unless you start doing some creative strategies. Now, for those of you who've been following me for quite some time, you'll know that I teach 7 different ways that you can actually make money from property without actually owning it, by controlling the property, okay? So you want to start to learn these low or no money down type strategies, and where you can, try to actually negotiate one of those up front, which then leaves your money free for the second deal. Now, if you have to get the deal using cash, I understand, no problem at all. But if you don't even try to get those creative strategies, then you don't know whether or not you would have actually been able to negotiate that. And so your money, you might be able to keep spare and then get a second deal actually happening. Now, of course, whenever you use a no or low money down type strategy, you are sharing your profits in some way, shape or form with other people, but 50% of something is better than 100% of nothing. And so when you start to learn those creative strategies, and there's a whole bunch of them, as I said, there's about 7 of them. When you start to learn those, you'll start to see that you can actually run many projects at the same time, because you can run them in parallel and the same amount of money is going to go a lot further. Now, if you don't do that, you have to wait for the project to actually finish. So let's just say, for example, you're doing a duplex. You're going to get in today. It might take 18 months, maybe even 2 years to run that project before you get your cash out. So you can't get into your next deal until 2 years' time, okay? Whereas if you start to use these low and no money down type strategies, what you're going to find is that you'll be able to get multiple projects at a time. You might be able to run 2, 3, 4 projects at a time. There's people in our community there's some people running 7, 8, 9. There's another person Matt Campbell, who's running 17 projects at the same time, all by using other people's money in some instances, joint ventures in other instances, option contracts in other instances, delayed settlement with early access. There's a whole bunch of these ways where you can actually push the cash requirements to the tail end of the project and potentially pay for this through the income of the sale of the finished product before you ever even own it. So Colleen, I would be starting to learn some of those low and no money down strategies. See if you can apply it. Keep your powder dry. If you can keep your powder dry, then you can actually go into a second and a third deal. The other thing that I would say, if you are thinking about a reno flip, now they will absolutely make money, no issue at all. Every development strategy makes money, so I don't want to poo-poo the strategy itself. What I would say though is it does not scale. And what I mean by that is if you do a small one, you can't do, I guess, you can't grow that into a massive one. So let's give you an example of a subdivision. You can do a 1:2 subdivision, 1:4 subdivision, 1:10. You can take that out to master plan communities where you're doing thousands and thousands of blocks of land. So that one strategy, when you start to learn the rules, will scale. Similarly with townhouses, you can do a duplex and then you can do a triplex and a quadplex and a six pack, and you can keep growing that. Or from a units perspective, you can start to do 2 stories, 3 stories, 10 stories, 50 stories, etc. So you want a strategy that you can learn and scale. Renovations don't do that. So you will absolutely make money, but it won't scale. So if that's the case, make sure you come to some of our meetups, see what other people are doing, get a feel for what development strategy might actually fit for you, and where appropriate, you can then take that on. Okay. Next question is Chloe. So Chloe says, hi Rob, do you offer one-on-one consultation for people who need advice to review their work, etc.? So Chloe, once upon a time I did. And so then she says, if so, what's your hourly rate? And if you don't, would you consider doing it? So once upon a time I used to, Chloe, and that's going a long, long way back. And now that the community has grown to such a size, the demand on my time is such that that's just not something that is physically something I can sustain. And what I was finding in that process is that the number of questions that I was getting that were almost identical was uncanny. And that's why we put together our 12-month education and mentoring program called Property Development Formula. More than happy if you want to, I guess, reach out to our team and actually have a look at that. You can find that on our website. Just go to the education link. So developernetwork.com.au, click on the education link, and you can actually have a look to see if that fits. And we do one-on-one consultation within that program, but I don't do it outside of that because I just don't have the bandwidth now that we're 15,000 strong in our community. So appreciate the question, but regrettably in this instance can't actually help. Next question, Mary says, I'm in Victoria and I want to build a duplex on a sloping block in northern New South Wales where there are no builders for the next 2 years. How do I source/control a kit or modular or tilt panel construction instead? And hey, what can go wrong is what she said. So, okay, so the first thing, Mary, is anytime you're doing any kit home or modular home, the concept is that they're going to be cheaper, okay? The practical reality is that they only start to become cheaper at a point in time where you actually get the scale to actually make the efficiencies of actually making that construction actually take effect. So if you're just doing a duplex, then there's not much efficiency in doing that. If you're doing 10 townhouses, 20 townhouses, then there's more and more efficiency, especially if they're all cookie cutter designs. So what you'll find is a lot of those, modular type homes, they won't be really geared for low scale type projects like that. Now, they may be able to do it, but what you'll find is the cost of doing that will actually go up because it takes them a long time to actually tool up. So the cost of doing that will go up, but that will be offset a little bit by the fact that the assembly on site will be much, much faster. So you're going to have less holding costs, but a higher construction cost. So yes, it is possible, but when you're doing a bespoke home like that, that is very definitely not something that you're just going to get off the shelf. And so they're going to have to custom tool that for you. So can they do it? The answer is yes. Will it be cost effective? I don't know. You're going to have to shop around and try and actually work that out. My gut feeling is no. The thing that will be on your advantage, though, is likelihood that they can actually meet the time requirements that you're actually talking about. Wherever you're talking about modular and kit homes, I guess there's a very small industry in Australia for this. Most of the big industry is actually in Europe. So what you might find, and China manufactures a whole bunch of stuff as well. So you might need to actually go shopping outside of Australia to actually find which particular manufacturers will actually create stuff and actually ship it in. And then you need to find someone local who will actually assemble it. And the local person needs to be a builder, which then you said there's no builders available for the next next 2 years. So you're kind of caught in this chicken and egg situation. So I guess, do I know any? No, there's a couple of presentations in some of our old archives for the meetups, one in Sydney and one in Melbourne that go back close to 18 odd months. So the names actually are eluding me as to who that were. If you can give me half a moment, I might be able to look up who they were. They're certainly worth reaching out to, see if I can actually find that without burning too much time. Okay, so I've got the gentleman's name. So Jan Leineman. I'm just trying to find the company name. So he was Sydney based, but they construct these in Europe and ship them over to Australia. So I know that for a fact. And there was also, so that was in Sydney, that presentation. That was actually all the way back in February of 2020. So it was actually a little while ago. If you go back and actually look at that archive in our members only portal, you'll actually find that. But the name of the company is not coming to me at the moment. So I will try to sanity check that. In the meantime, that was the last question. I'm just going to see if anyone has actually sent me any comments. So Irene has said, thank you very much. Thumbs up. Thank you, Irene. That is greatly appreciated. I'm just seeing if anyone has snuck in a question. And there are two sneaky questions that have come in. So two sneaky questions. So the first one, no, actually only one. So first one is, this one is from Sam. Sam says, hi, Rob. If lacking in confidence, is it wise to engage with a development manager, profit partner, or a fixed contract? This is a small-scale development. They will find site, apply the DA, look for the building, etc. In my opinion, you rather pay someone a fee than losing money trying to do it yourself. So, Sam, really good question. So I'm going to rephrase that in ways that question comes back to me a whole bunch of times. So it sounds to me in this instance like you're the money partner and you're wanting to shadow someone who's actually going to do the project for you and have them actually do the deal. Now, there are many, many people in our community that actually do that. So there's lots of experienced developers out there that can actually run the project for you and actually shadow you. What I will say, and you've got the right attitude, you're going to give away some of your profits in exchange for someone actually doing that. You want to make sure that you choose the right person, and you want to make sure that you have the ability to actually determine that they are the right person for the job by being able to assess their quality of work, by being able to assess their ability to actually assess your site, and a whole bunch more. Okay, so don't just go with anyone. You really want to assess their skills in actually doing that. Now, if you're relying on them to find the site as well, and you're going to throw your money at it, this is probably the biggest piece of caution that I'll give anyone wanting to be a money partner. Please do not, under any circumstances, put money into any deal if you yourself do not know how to assess the site and determine whether or not the deal is actually a deal. And the reason is that everybody that wants you to fund your deal is going to give you a feasibility that looks great. Every single one. You will not get a single feasibility that looks negative when they're trying to get you to give you money. So everything looks appealing. What you don't know is, did they do those two jobs that I was talking about before? Do they understand the site assessment criteria? Do they understand every single issue, challenge, problem that is actually going to be there? And do they actually understand how to read the market? And is the differential between those two enough to actually make this worthwhile? You need to be able to do that for yourself, Sam. And if you can't, you are not delegating the work, you're abdicating the work. Now, you might not have the time, you might not have the skills in order to do that. So you might, I guess, have someone who you know and trust to actually help you to assess that in the first instance. But please, please, please don't just blindly trust someone because they got a couple of projects across the line previously, because you don't know if they fluked it, because we've just had this massive upswing in the market where almost everybody was making money, whether they were a good developer or not. And it's amazing how many times when you take away the market movement from that, how many of those deals were really, really borderline as to being profitable, and they just got saved by the fact that we had this massive market upswing. Now, those people are going to be high and dry with the market going the other way, because they're still going to make the same mistakes that they did the first time round. So they all look very good right now, but are they actually genuinely good developers? Time will tell, mate. So be very, very careful with that. Okay, that looks like it is the last question to have come in. So I guess we're coming up to the hour. So thank you very much, everybody. It's been great. We run these open mic nights the first Saturday of every single month. So if you have another question that you would like to submit, make sure you click on the link below, submit that, and next month I will actually go through and actually answer those. Now, in the meantime, I hope to see you at one of our upcoming meetups. We run those all the way around the country, and we run them physical. We also live stream them, but trust me, folks, they are much, much better in person, and we're running a whole bunch of incentives for anyone who physically turns up to events with Bring a Friend for free, and the ability to win one of 50 holidays worth over $1,000 each. So go to our events page, come to one of our meetups. We would love to see you at the next event. Until then, folks, I'm going to say bye for now. It's been great seeing you. Bye.